Let me join Megan and other panelists that are with us today, and all of you for joining us today for this edition of Framing the Future, a program sponsored by the Maryland Forestry Foundation. I'm the president of the Maryland Forestry Foundation, Gary Allen, and it's our pleasure to produce this show each month as a way of kind of providing a background and on various issues that will affect, we believe, the future of forestry in Maryland. This month's program is unique. It is being recorded and will be made available on our website next week for those of you who miss it or want to share information about it, as have been all of the 48 previous shows. As a matter of fact, this month kicks off our fifth year. We had an anniversary program last month. We're looking forward to today's program and to introduce it and to share with you the details of our panelists for this month's webinar. I'm going to turn to our moderator, Megan Carr. Megan, thank you very much. You're on.
All right. Thank you, Gary. And yeah, thanks everyone for being here. A couple quick notes for you. As Gary mentioned, you can view our previous recordings from our webinar series over at the Maryland Forestry Foundation website. That's marylandforestryfoundation.org. Just navigate over to webinars. You can watch recordings of our previous sessions, including last month's chat with Dr. Doug Ptolemy. And you can also sign up to receive notices about our upcoming webinar entries. So we send out a monthly notice if you would like to stay tuned for future discussions. And today's discussion is a really important one, so we're very excited to continue our discussion that we started last year on the impacts of data centers on our environments. Um, we do welcome questions. Our speakers have welcomed questions for the end of today's session, so please enter those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will address those at the end of this hour. First up for today, we are joined by Kyle Hart. He grew up in Southern Virginia, spending every possible minute hunting, fishing, hiking, and camping in the rolling hills and forests around his home. He graduated from Hampton-Sydney College in 2016 with a degree in political science and biology, and has worked for various environmental nonprofits ever since, including Virginia League of Conservation Voters and the Virginia Conservation Network. He joined the National Parks Conservation Association in early 2020 and brings with him to his role a passion for the natural world and all things wild. He lives near Richmond, Virginia with his wife Janessa and their dog Graham. And thank you for joining us again, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you, Megan, and thanks everybody who's on today. I'm going to take a quick second and do the usual Zoom thing of sharing my screen. Let me bump up to the top here and start this slideshow. So thanks everybody for being here. As Megan said, my name is Kyle Hart. I work for a nonprofit called the National Parks Conservation Association. I live in sort of central Virginia near Richmond, and have been with National Parks Conservation Association for about 5.5 years. So very quickly, who is NPCA? Who are we? We're a national nonprofit. We've been around for more than 100 years. We advocate for all America's 433 national park sites. That's everything from kind of the big ones that folks know and love, like Yellowstone and Yosemite, all the way down to sort of the various units like Assateague National Seashore, Manassas National Battlefield, and others. We have staff in Alaska, Florida, and kind of everywhere between. We're about 180 or 190 staff members strong, and I work kind of in what we call our Mid-Atlantic region, which is Pennsylvania, Maryland, DC, Virginia, and West Virginia, and Delaware. So my work largely encompasses Virginia and Virginia issues, but also some work in Maryland, particularly as it pertains to this subject of data centers, which is something I have personally been working on for about 4 years, 4.5 years. So NPCA, we're pretty easy to find on the web and on the social media. So if you wanted to look us up, that's where you can find us. So some of this might be old information for y'all, and so I'm going to try and go quick. And if there are questions sort of at the end about some stuff that I gloss over, I won't hesitate. Don't hesitate to ask, and I won't mind coming back around. But very quickly, a data center is just a large warehouse, sometimes several hundred square feet, filled wall to wall, floor to ceiling with essentially computer servers that store and process the world's internet. Largely, most of today's data centers that are being proposed we've shifted largely away from essentially what is cloud storage. So when you store something on Microsoft Word or on your phone, and it says, "Would you like to add this to the cloud?" Like that, essentially that information lives in a data center. All of today's, not all of, but a large majority of today's data centers are to essentially fuel the artificial intelligence build out, which requires massive amounts of server space and computational power to do the various functions that AI is promising to do. I like to say that AI has not yet proven itself as a sort of a viable economic technology at scale. And so I think at its core, there's a fair bit of speculation around this and essentially a hope that artificial intelligence will essentially one day be this ubiquitous thing across the tech landscape. We're not there right now, but that is largely what's driving this discussion. Data centers obviously have their physical square footprint of concrete walls, and like any industrial facility, they have industrial of nature to them. They have backup diesel generators, and you can see those in this photo on their right hand side. That line of low lying tractor trailer looking things to the right. Average facilities anywhere from 50 to 100 diesel generators kind of per building, and so it's not uncommon for a large campus of data centers, which has 10 or 15 buildings, to have upwards of 1,000 diesel generators on site. They also have sort of the standard things that come along with industrial development: parking lots, air conditioning units, stormwater management ponds, kind of your standard picture for large industrial growth. The environmental concerns around data centers are many. Obviously, there's site selection, where data centers do and do not belong as an industrial site. Obviously, you can see this one in particular is tucked pretty close to homes and neighborhoods. Water use, so sometimes data centers use a lot of water. We'll touch on that in a second. Energy, and then of course getting energy to those data centers. So where's the power coming from and how is it getting there? And of course the backup diesel generators and the potential air quality concerns from those. So this is a map of data centers in Virginia. Virginia has the largest concentration of data centers in the world. Dark red is planned data centers, light red is existing. The dark red has wildly overtaken in Virginia the light red. So Virginia currently has about 63 million, 65 million existing square footage worth of data centers. The current sort of proposed build out is in the area of 400 million square feet. So, arguably Virginia has barely even started its data center build out. Of course, you start to get into that speculation thing I was talking about, how much of those actually come to fruition. But Virginia is by a landslide the largest data center market in the world. Maryland, of course, is doing its best to try and catch up, but so are a bunch of other states and localities around the country. Atlanta, Georgia has a booming market. Sort of the Midwest, Ohio, Illinois have some growth going on. Pennsylvania is seeing some growth. So Virginia is not alone. Maryland is not alone. This is kind of happening in a lot of different places. So why do we as an organization care? In Virginia, we've seen about 5 proposals directly adjacent to national park sites or historic sites. So that was our original nexus into this discussion, was just a siting discussion. Of course, you start to unpack this issue, and there's all of these other sort of things that come along with it. The air quality, both from a local, diesel generator perspective and from coal and natural gas production to power data centers. Of course, there's sort of a climate implication here. Water quality, water quantity, new transmission lines, and in particular from NPCA's perspective, how those new transmission lines impact national parks and other protected lands. So we'll hear a little bit more about that. And of course, I think the other thing that unfortunately we don't have the time to spend on today, but this is other interesting thing, is who's paying for all of this new infrastructure that's needed, the new transmission lines and new water lines, and how those costs get allocated. And essentially what we're seeing right now is those upgrades that are needed to fuel this data center growth are being borne by all ratepayers. So when in Virginia, when Dominion Energy plans a large new transmission line and a new natural gas power plant to meet energy demand, and the tune of that is $2 billion, that essentially just gets cleaved up and everybody sees, a couple extra dollars a month on their energy bill. And so the real question is like, who's paying for all of this? So data centers at their core are really not that much different from a land use perspective than other types of industrial development. We're just talking large sites, sometimes a few hundred or even a few thousand acres of oftentimes existing farms, fields, and forest being converted into heavy industrial space. So you can see here in this picture, this is like just a standard data center being constructed. You have cranes, you have, a big open dirt pad, a lot of trucks and pieces of diesel equipment kind of pushing dirt around and doing the construction. But I like to remind folks that the real problem from a land conversion perspective is not necessarily sort of that one data center, it's the scale, right? So in Virginia, we're looking at about 100,000 acres of land conversion to make way for the data center build out in the next 10 to 15 years. There's not another land use out there that comes even kind of close to that. I mean, this would be the equivalent of adding something like 1,000 or 2,000 Walmart supercenters across the Virginia landscape in a decade. Not to mention, of course, the energy impacts and the water impacts and the transmission line impacts. But like from a land use perspective, one data center, not any more of a big deal than other types of industrial use, but at scale, it starts to kind of become an eye-popping concern. So water quality and quantity, of course, you have a quality concern, which once again kind of goes hand in hand with industrial development, site grading and clearing and runoff, existing, once the site kind of becomes operational, you've got your stormwater pollution runoff concerns, your road salts, and your standard other pollutants that come with industrial development. And then, of course, there's a quantity concern, like how much water does a data center need? And then once again, at scale, is there enough water to go around? Loudoun County, which is sort of Northern Virginia data center alley, is using 1.5 billion gallons of water annually for data centers alone. That's all coming out of the Potomac River. This picture on your right is the headwaters of a different river system in Virginia called the Rappahannock River. This is the Thornton River. But you can see, like, this is summer of, I guess, 2 years ago at this point, a pretty significant drought came across Virginia, I imagine all of sort of the eastern seaboard, and you had like rivers that normally full and coursing basically running dry. The other thing that's a concern is there definitely isn't in the state of Virginia at the moment good regional planning happening, good disclosure by data centers to regional planning entities. I can assure you there's not interstate planning really going on from between like Virginia, Maryland, and DC from like a big picture health of the Potomac River perspective. And so those are some of the things that like from a water perspective start to become a concern. Of course, there's also the energy impacts of data centers and where that power comes from. We start to talk about like getting power to data centers and power lines, but that energy has to come from somewhere. And when you build a new energy source, whether it's solar, wind, or natural gas, there are land footprint impacts of that. A lot of data center companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, have all, very publicly said that they have plans to be carbon neutral, net zero by a certain date. 2040 is kind of the running number. So what that means is, quite frankly, a lot more solar energy. The rough number from Virginia, this is speculation and, kind of taking out other energy sources like nuclear. But Virginia would need more than 1 million acres of solar to meet data center energy demand. That's like an eye-popping number. I like to say that Shenandoah National Park, the sort of this huge swath of land in, central Virginia is 200,000 acres. Just as a reminder, if we were to do that, if we were to build 1 million acres of solar, at the end of it, we would be no closer to carbon neutrality than we are right now. And I think that's like sort of where this concern comes from. You start to grapple with is it possible? Can it be done? And a lot of people would tell you, no, it can't be done. So something else to think about. So getting power to data centers, of course, transmission lines, you can see on this map, this is just a handful of planned transmission upgrades. Steve's going to talk in a little bit. But you can see that bright red line kind of coming across Maryland. That is the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project. That is the bright red indicates essentially new transmission corridors. The brown indicate what we call essentially on top of. So that means there's an existing transmission corridor and then they're just going to add to it. So this one coming across West Virginia, through Virginia, back up into Maryland, is what we call the Morrow Line. That essentially is going to take an existing transmission corridor and just add another large transmission line next to it, which of course has significant land use impacts. And then the purple corridor, kind of mostly down here in Virginia, are what we call wreck and rebuild, which means, obviously there's a significant cost to that, but theoretically, everything remains in the existing right-of-way square footage. So no serious additional land use implications, but of course, you have construction impacts and cost impacts and that sort of stuff. So now this is kind of the meat of my presentation, and as usual, I spent too much time on that last one. But so what's going on in Maryland? Like, where are we? So this whole conversation started way back in 2024. I guess not way back, but about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, where there was a bill introduced by Governor Moore. It was like his bill to essentially exempt backup diesel generation and really backup generation of any type from Public Service Commission review. And so essentially what happened was all around sort of the proposed quantum loophole project in Frederick County at the East Alco site and others, where, as I mentioned, they have several hundred diesel generators planned as a backup energy source. Well, they submitted an application to the Public Service Commission essentially to get the process waived, so that they didn't have to do a certificate of public convenience and necessity, a CPCN. And the Public Service Commission basically told them no. It's like, hey, this is a significant impact. We're going to make you go through the process. We're going to make you prove to us that there are no alternatives, to really lay out all of the impacts on air quality, on communities. And essentially what happened is Quantum Loophole threw a temper tantrum. They made a big announcement that they were going to essentially abandon their site, that they would essentially be blackballing the entire state of Maryland from any data centers anywhere, and they would tell every other data center in the operator in the country never to do business in Maryland. Their permitting system is arduous. And the governor wanted to attract business. And he said, whoa, wait a second. What if we changed the law and took away that process? And so that's what happened. That bill got passed essentially unanimously out of both chambers and was signed into law. So essentially what happens now is there's no real strict oversight of large data center campuses from a diesel generator view perspective. So that was kind of the beginning. Now, at least, the one good thing, I suppose, that came out of that is it got the discussion going. It got people asking questions. It got lawmakers asking questions for what are the impacts here? So fast forward to this year, Senate Bill 116, carried and introduced by Senator Karen Lewis Young. A few other folks eventually signed on, and of course it passed overwhelmingly. This essentially directed various state agencies to conduct an analysis of the likely environmental, energy, and economic impacts of data center development in Maryland. This was a good bill. It was supported by a lot of folks. It passed with flying colors. Everyone kind of collectively agreed this was a good idea. Both let's get our arms around the potential environmental and energy impacts, but as well as what are the positives? Are there positives? What could those positives be? It was unfortunately vetoed by the governor. Now, the governor made a bunch of sort of statements about how it was about cost and budget and how these studies never actually mean anything. But my speculation is that the industry doesn't want to be studied. The data center industry likes to operate in the dark. And so, pulled some strings and got that bill vetoed. Now, there are efforts to override that veto. Obviously, the votes exist. But historically, the Maryland General Assembly has been not super willing to go against the will of the administration if sort of there's a party alignment. So we'll see what happens. This is a screenshot, of course, not of Maryland's data center study, but Virginia did a data center study in 2024, provided the entire community and lawmakers with a slew of helpful information, policy recommendations, and the like. So hopefully that will eventually happen. And of course, as a reminder, while the other data center bill and the study bill were happening, a bunch of other pieces of legislation were introduced that never left committee. So those are really the only two that made any traction or got anywhere, one of them being bad and one of them being good. So we will see what essentially 2026 brings. Around the state of Maryland, a bunch of places are considering data centers in some way, shape, or form. Frederick obviously is kind of, for better or for worse, leading the charge. Steve's going to get into what's happening in Frederick here in a little bit. Prince George's County, there was a big hubbub around essentially the old, or what will become the old Commander Stadium at Landover, or in Landover. This is a screenshot from a news article, or an image from a news article, where essentially citizens rallied in opposition to that project. And in response, Prince George's County essentially said, okay, we're going to put a pause on new data centers until we can kind of figure out where we're at. There are some small operational data centers, which we'll see on a map in a second, but the bigger sort of what we call co-locating data center sites like Quantum Loophole are either somewhere in the pipeline, either under construction or still being, proposed and talked about. So quite frankly, like, this is a screenshot, and I can share the link to this map. This is a super helpful map that shows like planned operational data centers. Kind of, this map covers the whole country. So you can see obviously huge cluster in Northern Virginia. And if you zoomed out on that map, you'd see a lot more in sort of South Central Virginia. But Maryland generally, this is what the map looks like. There are a couple of small operational data centers kind of scattered around, and then sort of the big cluster of planned and under construction facilities exist in Frederick. This yellow dot down here, kind of bottom central of the screen, is that Landover site. So that's kind of where things are. I also like the company types down at the bottom, because it helps you distinguish between what's what. And so the triangle, the hyperscalers, is kind of becoming the norm. So that kind of helps you wrap your head around like what's what. If there's no information about what's going to go there, like at the Landover site or a lot of the Frederick sites, it's just basically carrier neutral, which means that, it's TBD. So our state policy goals, obviously we want to pass a study and develop a plan for the state of Maryland. And then after that, the state needs to have a better handle and review of large projects that impact the grid and air quality. There should be heightened transparency around this industry, disclosure of water use and energy use, impacts to historic resources and the like. The industry should obviously be paying for any new infrastructure upgrades, everything from new transmission lines like the MPRP to new natural gas and other energy generation sources. And then, of course, Maryland has a data center tax. Maryland has a data center tax credit, tax incentive. That should be fiddled with to ensure that any facilities that are getting the tax credit are actually being good neighbors and doing what they're supposed to do from an environmental perspective. So what can you do? Meet with people, particularly in your local government. Go to your boards of supervisors and planning commission meetings. Stop bad projects before they get going. That is easily by a mile, the easiest way to stay out in front of this. Obviously, get to know and meet with your state delegates and senators and encourage them sort of to pass good legislation, and obviously talk to your friends and neighbors. So that's all I have. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Maryland or Megan and Steve. Thanks all.
All right, thank you very much, Kyle. A lot of great information in there and really important context for today's discussion, as well as getting into the details. To talk in more depth on a particular case, we are joined by Steve Black, who is the owner and operator of Ray Melton Farm, a wholesale tree nursery in Adamstown, Maryland. Since 2021, Mr. Black has served as president of the Sugarloaf Alliance. The alliance works to conserve and protect the rural character and environmental quality of the Sugarloaf region in southern Frederick County, Maryland. Mr. Black grew up in a farming family in central Ohio and received his bachelor's degree from Carnegie Mellon University, a master's degree from the University of Pittsburgh, and he's been a fellow at the Kennedy School of Government. So thanks very much for joining us today, Steve. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna share my screen, but it was having Kyle speak first was wonderful, because I don't have to explain what a data center is, which I detest doing. So he talked about the data center industry and where they are and sort of what's going on with that in general. I'm going to split into two parts here. I'm going to talk about the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project, which is, he mentioned it, it's a new high tension electrical line project that is specifically caused by the data center industry. And then when I'm done with that, talk about what's going on in Frederick County and zoom in a little bit on the local impact and the local game that's being played in Frederick County with data centers, because I think it's analogous to what goes on all over everywhere. So we'll see if I can share my screen here. Just give it a second to come up for everyone.
Looks good on my end.
Okay, thank you for saying that. All right. So the MPRP power line project, this is a project that was requested by PJM. They are the organization that runs the electrical grid for most of the Northeast. They put out a request for bids to companies, and a company called PSE&G out of New Jersey had the low bid, and they won the contract for a 69-mile long high tension line that runs through Baltimore County, Carroll County, and Frederick County in Maryland. This would be a 150-foot wide clear-cut right-of-way that goes along what they call a greenfield development route. In other words, this is all ground that has never had power lines on it before. Most of it is rural agricultural ground, but it cuts through, notably in Frederick County, it cuts right through the Sugarloaf treasured landscape around Sugarloaf Mountain here in southern Frederick County, and it would require clear cutting this strip through that treasured landscape. It has a direct impact on farms and rural businesses, but it also goes right next to a number of residential areas. So people are now dealing with the prospect of having this in their backyard. So that clear cutting process is, I think there's no other word to say, but destroy about 1,200 acres of Maryland. It cuts across hundreds of different properties, impacting obviously cultivated cropland, but also in an almost comical way, this project will clear cut strips through forest conservation easements. So you're not allowed to cut the woods down, but the power line project can. And then, of course, it's going to cross a lot of waterways and streams. The clear cutting of the tree canopy along this route, it's sort of obvious that that's going to have a significant environmental impact, but there are second order impacts that don't occur to a lot of people. And I know in southern Frederick County here, the brook trout that live in a lot of these streams require cold water. And by removing the tree canopy over these streams, it's going to increase the water temperature and make it not habitable to that particular kind of fish. And there are impacts like this across ecosystems from having a clear-cut strip through the landscape the way they need to do with MPRP. Those 400 properties that are impacted, the vast majority, and I mean something like 92% of the property owners object to this being done to their land. And so we are facing a process now that will end with eminent domain being used to seize the rights to this part of their property from owners, and they will be forced to allow this construction project to occur and to then live with the impacts of this power line on their property. Kyle had mentioned just how much power the data centers use, and he had some good aerial photos that showed what a data center looks like when it's done and what it looks like under construction. It is really important to understand that the impact of the data center industry sprawls way beyond their physical footprint. So these are plots of PJM, the company that operates the grid. These are their assessments, the The bottom axis is cut off there, but that's the year that they expect this level of power demand. This shows how much the growth of the data center industry in recent years has changed that assessment. You can see 2024 there with a steady increase in power demand, and the 2025 estimate shows explosive growth. Now, the impact of this, of course, this requires more power lines and more generating facilities be built, but it also impacts everyone in their electrical bill. Electric rates are a simple supply and demand function. So if the data centers are going to demand huge amounts of additional power, but we are not able to build power plants quickly, the supply and demand results in increased electric rates for everyone in the PJM region. To put some numbers to this, PJM just announced a few weeks ago that their estimates for power demand increase in the coming years will be 94% driven by the data center industry. 94% of the new electrical needs are coming from this one industry. So in Frederick County, not only are we dealing with the end of the MPRP route, and I should add in, I should have done this when I had the map of the route up. MPRP, when you think about it, it is literally an extension cord to connect the southeastern Pennsylvania power generating plants to Northern Virginia data center needs. And the route runs right through Maryland. Even the new data center construction in Frederick County that we're going to talk about here in a second, it is not part of the calculus for needing MPRP. The new data centers in Frederick County or in PG County are going to need their own set of additional power lines to get power to that region. We don't have any power generating plants in Frederick County. We would have to bring the power in from outside, and that will require MPRP number 2 and number 3 and number 4. So if we flash over to Frederick County, the story of data centers here is not a brand new one. Back in 2019, Amazon Web Services identified Frederick County as a place they would like to expand their data center footprint into. They came to the county and they signed a non-disclosure agreement with Frederick County. And for 2.5 years or so, they worked with dozens of county staff, including elected officials, in total secrecy to develop a plan that would have had 9,400 acres, 9,400 acres of ground set aside in Frederick County in 3 large areas for Amazon data centers. Now, this secret got out, and Sugarloaf Alliance, the group I'm a part of, we actually put in Public Information Act requests to try to uncover this secret project. The county stonewalled us, and we had to sue Frederick County to get these records. We won in court, and the records that came out showed the actual areas where they were intending to put these data centers. You can see that anything on this map that is light yellow, those are all residential areas. The giant purple blob in the middle is the East Alco site that we'll talk about next. The impacts of this project were never discussed publicly. The needs, the demands on the water and sewer system were never discussed publicly. They had a plan to run through the rezonings like a freight train on a week-by-week schedule that would only allow the public to know shortly before the meetings just what was going on, and wouldn't know until the end of all of the meetings just what the scale of this development was going to be. So this secret approach to doing development is something the data center industry uses all over the country. It is not unique to a specific company. This is their mode of operation. To get in quickly, before anybody can actually discuss the impacts or what it might mean for the wider community. Because we were able to identify this, Amazon pulled out. But what we were left with when Amazon canceled their plans were landowners in all of these areas that had been in secret discussions to sell their properties for orders of magnitude more money per acre than normal ag land gets sold for. So these, and largely these were land speculators that own these parcels. So they are still interested in selling their parcels for data centers. They continue to work on Frederick County government. And so what we have now is this new approach, the critical digital infrastructure, which I put in quotes because it is not critical infrastructure. It's a private company like any other. I like snack food, but a Dorito factory is not critical snack food industry, right? This is a marketing term they've applied, but it's taken hold in the county. And now we have county officials who see data center development as an impact-free cash cow. This will bring millions of dollars into the county, pay no attention to any of the impacts. There's been no comprehensive cost and benefit study. They have not adequately looked at the impacts to things like property values, electric rates, wider environmental impacts. All of this is, they're trying to gloss it over. And so the community and preservation organizations are in a running battle to highlight those impacts from this new industry so that we can take a more measured approach to it. The current state of play in Frederick County is we've narrowed down from the 3 large areas that Amazon wanted to 1 area around the East Alco, the former aluminum smelting plant. So the purple area on this map is largely the footprint of the old Alcoa property. Alcoa, in their wisdom, had a green buffer that they didn't develop around the factory. The actual factory is this area. I don't want to do that. It's this area right in the middle, if you can see my mouse moving. So originally we had about 250 acres of industrial activity in this area. With the advent of Quantum Loophole, the developer that has come in and bought this parcel, we will have 1,600 acres, 1,600 acres of data center development is going to go on in this area. The ground is already zoned industrial, so as you would say, the ship has sailed on that. That's going to happen. The question in front of the county right now is all the other area, the crosshatched area, which is currently agricultural, zoned agricultural, comprehensively planned agricultural. It's even in set-aside areas for focused ag preservation programs. The county is trying to decide whether to double the amount of ground available to data centers. We just had a public hearing with the Planning Commission all day yesterday. For a daytime meeting, it was incredibly well attended by the citizenry. There was a thoughtful set of questions and statements made, and the planning commissioners are right now sort of grappling with the question of whether to expand, whether to double the amount of ground for data centers in Frederick County or stick with the already industrial area. At the end of the meeting yesterday, it sounded like 4 out of the 7 planning commissioners were willing to stick with the current industrial ground and not try to expand it. They raised some really good questions about the fact that we don't know in Frederick County how these data centers are going to operate. They claim, the data centers and developers claim, that this will be entirely different than Northern Virginia and that we won't make the same mistakes as Northern Virginia. The problem is when you see the site plans for the Frederick County data centers, they look exactly like the site plans for the Northern Virginia data centers. So the planning commissioners have quite wisely said, maybe we should wait and see before we go turning over more ground. This is a better picture of the proposed data center area. Again, the yellow highlighted ground, those are all communities. Southern Frederick City is just to the north there of the big red blob. This puts in context what up to 1% of the county landmass looks like. It's a very large area. So the Planning Commission is going to make recommendations to the County Council. They're only recommendations. The council will then begin its process. They are going to have 3 meetings at least to review this concept. There will be public comment available along the way, which means an email writing campaign. The County Council will hold their own public hearing, which will not be during the day. It'll be in the evening, and you can expect a significant turnout for that. And they hope to have a decision on this by the end of the year. The decision will allow the developers to move forward with making rezoning applications for those new parcels to convert that ag ground into industrial ground and begin construction. The deadline on this in Frederick County is July of next year. County rules say you can't make major land use decisions within 6 months of a general election, which is a wonderfully clever rule to have. It keeps people from having election-related monkey business with land use decisions. But they have to fit this all in before July. They want to do it with the current council because at least 2 of the 7 current county council members sound like and are making statements to the effect that the more data centers Frederick County can have, the better. So we have an uphill fight here in Frederick County. I will make a shameless plug here for my organization, Sugarloaf Alliance. Our website will help you keep up to date on all of these things going on in Frederick County, both with the data center overlay and with the MPRP project. And signing up for the newsletter is free, and you can do that through the website. And I think if you'd like to keep track, and certainly if you want to participate in these things going on in Frederick County, you go to the Sugarloaf Alliance website and fill in the little form, and we'll get you on the mailing list. I would love to have questions on this. Both these topics are a mile deep, and I have just skated over the surface. So I'm happy to take any questions on any of these things.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you both for really great overviews of a very complex topic. So we will give folks some time. Again, please do enter your questions into the Q&A chat function. We have a couple pending from Bill that we can delve into, but we absolutely welcome additional discussion. So I think these are primarily geared toward Kyle in terms of some of the energy and water demands and impacts and sources. So do you have data of the gallons that you noted for cooling purposes for data centers, what percentage of that might be recycled? Or is that the total usage that you cited, even when recycling of water is considered?
Yeah, so to the number that I cited for 1.5 billion gallons approximately for Loudoun County, that is how much water they're selling to data centers. It depends on the facility for how much actually returns to the system and how it doesn't, and like what doesn't. So some of those facilities, upwards of 90 or even 95% of that water is evaporating into the atmosphere, so it's not returned to the system. Those are, data centers that use evaporative cooling to cool their facilities. Some facilities use what are called closed loop systems, which means that over the course of it kind of depends, but let's call it a month, they'll bring in X number of gallons and then they hold it, and then it gets flushed back out in a month. And so it's like this continuing cycle where it's in, held, and then out. So it just depends on the system. The verbiage that we like to use when talking with local governments around Maryland is to regulate the impacts, not the technology, right? And so if your local water planning office or your local planners say, well, based on sort of mapping and modeling, we can spare 1 million gallons a month, or 100,000 gallons a day, or like whatever the number you come up with. Don't regulate the type of system. Don't say, well, we only want closed loop cooling systems. Regulate the actual impacts on the system, to ensure that there's not ways to circumvent that process, right? And to ensure that actually the numbers actually kind of the math makes sense. So to answer your question, the answer is it depends. Roughly speaking, upwards of 50% is lost, but it kind of, every facility is different.
Can I chime in on something here?
Please.
So the data centers have to get cooled off, right? It's the equivalent of a window mount air conditioner blowing into a toaster oven. That's what a data center does. They can either cool with fresh water, which requires evaporative cooling, like Kyle was describing, and you can literally lose the vast majority of the water that goes into the plant disappears. So the problem there is for things like recharge of waterways. If the city of Frederick takes water out of the Potomac, it gets used, it goes to a sewage treatment plant, and it goes back into the Potomac River. The net loss of water out of the Potomac River should be relatively small. If you are pulling water out for evaporative cooling, that water does not go back into the river, which reduces the downstream flow. And in a drought situation or a low flow situation, that can be really problematic if you have a heavy water consumer. It's not just using the water, it's consuming the water. The flip side is to not cool your data center with water, but you cool it with electricity. And so while you may minimize your water consumption, your consumption of electricity goes through the roof instead. And because because right now, and honestly, despite the marketing claims that the data center industry would like to have everyone buy into, their power comes off the normal electric grid. And the normal electric grid produces a huge amount of greenhouse gas. And it doesn't matter where the power is coming from. If it's coming from a plant that burns stuff, it's going to be contributing greenhouse gases. So you may save on water consumption locally, but instead you are causing a much bigger climate-wide, system-wide impact from that extra electric consumption.
Great points, and that also tie closely with the other two questions that we currently have in the queue that are somewhat related. So Bill asked how many of the Virginia data centers have self-contained energy sources, both primary and backup, as opposed to getting their power from Dominion or other sources. And another attendee asked, with the net zero goals, are any of the data centers incorporating on-site solar installations or proposing any green technology to offset their energy needs?
Yeah, so we'll tackle these kind of at the same time, obviously, Megan, but I'm going to also separate them. So answer the first question, are there sort of self-contained energy sources? The answer is, generally speaking, no. We have seen, for instance, there was a big hubbub in Memphis where a Tesla data center called an xAI facility essentially just brought in their own natural gas turbines, and then they were pumping in natural gas to that site to provide power. And the reason for that is the grid operator was basically like, hey, we have a pretty lengthy window to get you connected to the grid. And they were like, no worries, we'll just do it ourselves. They did that without any permits. It was kind of like that's a big no-no. So that is something that we've seen. We've also seen proposals kind of around the country for what we call co-location. And so that would be a data center facility sited next to either a new, refurbished, or existing power generation source. And so there were a couple of those. So way down in Southwest Virginia, in a county called Pittsylvania County, there was a planned about 2,000 acre data center campus next to a 3 gigawatt. It would have been an entirely new off-grid natural gas generating plant. That project was shot down by the local government. Microsoft announced kind of like this big announcement, though I haven't seen any movement on it, that they were planning to restart 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania and basically pull all of their power from that sort of refurbished nuclear facility. And then there was another facility in Pennsylvania where Amazon essentially at the Talen power plant, where Amazon essentially went to Talen and said, hey, forget selling power to the broader grid. We'll take all of it. We'll build right here and we'll take all of it. And thankfully, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, basically shut that down and said, no, 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 that power, like we're using, like the rest of the grid is using that power. And so that project got stopped. So we're starting to see these projects, like these proposals pop up. But the only like real ones that are working are like on-site natural gas generation, which of course has all kinds of negative community impacts that like environmentalists like NPCA would generally be opposed to. Now to the solar question. So honestly, shockingly, like solar on rooftops for data centers is not the norm. Admittedly, like it's when we're talking about like a drop in the bucket, but you know, something I like to say that like something's better than nothing, but we're not seeing that. You know, thinking about the scale, as I kind of pointed out, you know, one data center building would need 5,000 acres of solar, right? So like we're kind of, it's not really possible. What we are seeing, I'm going to use a word that I might get in trouble for saying, but it's kind of like a sham, right? Like where Amazon is like, hey, we're buying carbon credits in the Amazon rainforest, and that's why we're carbon neutral in Virginia. And it's kind of like, I don't know if that technically makes sense. But that's like the argument that's being made, is that like we're keeping rainforest from being cut down over here. And so our coal and natural gas use in Virginia is offset. So that's like the argument that's being made. I think like the only real way to prove like actual facility carbon neutrality is like to use co-location or on-site generation of, realistically, like nuclear is the only power source that could provide that. And we just haven't seen that at scale yet.
Yeah, you're in terms of the amount of power you need for one of these plants, people have trouble getting their head around it. And what we're looking at here in Frederick County, if we stick to the smaller footprint, the existing industrial ground, and we only have about 1,600 acres of data centers here, it's the power consumption equivalent of like 2.5 Baltimores. The entire power demand of the city of Baltimore times 2.5 in one little area in Frederick County. And that is a whole lot of solar panels. And Kyle's exactly right. The numbers are, I mean, for one of these modern large scale data centers that's going to use 500 megawatts, 600 megawatts, that is 5,000 to 6,000 acres of solar panels to power 2 or 3 acres building.
And Gary, I see you came back on camera. Do you have questions for our panelists?
Well, I do, if you don't mind. I'd like to ask Steve a further question based upon a comment he made in his presentation, which I frankly surprised me a great deal. I had always thought the Piedmont project was in part a mechanism to help provide power to the Frederick data center. But your comment seemed to indicate that it was not even a part of the calculation. And therefore, my question is, if that's the case, what are the implications based upon the comment you just made about the power requirements for the project being 2.5 times Baltimore? What is the discussion like in the review of the present proposal on how those power requirements can be addressed?
So first thing, and I should be more clear with this, when they did the MPRP, the technical study that resulted in the need that resulted in MPRP, right? The new data centers, like 2 of the projects out of over a dozen, 2 of the projects were factored in, and they said part of one of the components of the increased demand for MPRP, part of it is for Frederick County data centers. The vast majority is for Northern Virginia data centers. Subsequent to that, they have changed the design of the MPRP so that the line no longer connects to the substation close to the Quantum Loophole project. And it goes directly to a substation called Goose Creek in Northern Virginia. So the power that will have to supply the East Alco project here, the quantum loophole project, is actually going to come in a thing called Marl, which Kyle mentioned, which is power coming from West Virginia to the Dobbs substation here in southern Frederick County. Part of it will go to quantum loophole. The rest will go down to Northern Virginia. When we talk about the expanded footprint potential here in southern Frederick County, that has not even come up on the planning for new power lines yet. That will be something we will see in the future, but it is inarguable that you will have to run power lines to supply this if they expand the data center footprint here in southern Frederick County. Like there is no on-site power generation. There is no option, right? People will talk, you'll hear it come up sometimes, small modular nuclear reactors. And these small reactors have small output. And so we're looking at having dozens of small modular reactors in order to power this complex they're envisioning here in southern Frederick County. And there's a timeline problem with the small reactors. It is not mature technology yet. They have not gotten through the regulatory process. And we have too many people living in this area. And NRC rules have a footprint around reactors so that you can evacuate people quickly. And southern Frederick County doesn't meet the requirements.
So you anticipate additional impact based on even the current proposal, let alone the additional one. Is that a fair comment?
Oh yeah. We have not seen the full list of impacts yet, even from what is currently approved here.
Mm-hmm. And judging from the controversy that's been stirred by the Piedmont project, this is a controversy that's likely to continue, is what you're saying. Okay. Megan, that was my question about this presentation. I really think the guys did a fantastic job. It was excellent, very informative. I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions. And Kyle, let me simply say, as I want to telegraph, this is an ongoing issue. We're going to revisit it again in the fall of 26. It is not going to go away. The implications of this industry in our area, let alone the nation, is that it'll continue to grow. The latest data that I've seen say that there are literally a goal of over 7,000 of these already proposed around the country. I suspect that will grow, and that the industry itself is now approaching $1 trillion investment in these kinds of facilities, and each one averaging, from what I'd seen just recently in Prince George's County, of $5 billion each. So it's not a cheap thing, it's an impactful thing. I suppose the one thing you guys have not addressed, which seems to turn the heads of a lot of elected officials, is the jobs impact of these data centers. And I'm just wondering if there is a area here we need to explore further, because my impression is that it's pretty modest ultimately, except perhaps in construction. Have you seen any other data that you want to add to that conversation about what its long-term job impact is versus its short-term implications during the construction and land clearance phase?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. When you're building a big building, building a big facility, whether it's a tennis shoe manufacturing plant or a data center or a football stadium, you employ a lot of people to build a big project. I mean, that's baked into the cake. The question is what happens in the long run, right? Once you get past the sugar high of super big employment during construction, either you keep building ad infinitum in order to keep that sugar high going, or you have to content yourself with the people that actually work in the data center. And the important thing here is a data center can employ people that live in Sri Lanka, right? I mean, you do not have to be on site to do a lot of the management of a data center. So for the people that actually work in the facility, it's a tiny percentage of what you employ during construction. If you look, I went through a little exercise a while ago and I looked at aerial photos of the data centers in Northern Virginia at their parking lots. And those parking lots do not have a lot of cars in them on an average Tuesday morning. And that's the metric, right? The industry is going out of its way to figure out how to run these buildings lights out. In other words, never turn the lights on inside. And they're doing that by automating things, finding redundancies so that they don't have to have as many people there. You wind up hiring a lot of security guards and you hire a lot of people to change air filters.
So it's a dark facility, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Megan, is there any closing comments? Steve, do you have any closing comments?
No, I think anybody who feels exercised by this topic really needs to join up with one of these groups that can show you how to get involved.
Okay. And Kyle, any closing comments?
Yeah, same thought. If this interests you, if you are concerned, get involved. All politics is local. Get to know your local boards of supervisors. Be a thorn in their side on this issue. Make those phone calls. Show up to those meetings, and that's how we make change.
Megan, you want to add anything at the end?
I don't think I could possibly add anything better than that, other than just to thank our speakers. This has been an educational hour. I hope that our audience has learned a few things about some of the misconceptions and narratives that have been put out there about data centers and how they don't necessarily match with the reality. So thank you both.
Yes, I want to thank you both. And my closing comments are simply these. For those of you who are interested in this topic here in Prince George's County, Maryland, there is a meeting on qualified data centers for public input on Saturday, October the 25th at 10 a.m. at the Prince George's County Sports and Learning Complex. It is complementary to the same process that Steve is seen take place in Frederick County, but perhaps Prince George's has slowed it a little bit more than Frederick has in the beginning, and we have a chance to at least put it in greater perspective. Having said that, let me invite all of you back again next month to our Framing the Future series. We'll be having a visit from the Maryland Department of Planning to talk about land preservation. Just 2 years ago, the Maryland State Legislature set some really ambitious goals for land preservation in Maryland, setting 30% of the state aside in some form of protection by 2030, a goal we have already met. But we've also set a goal for 40% by 2040. Such kind of slogan legislation raises a lot of questions because as we track our progress towards such goals, we find that there are a lot of different things that get counted as preservation. In fact, more than a dozen different categories are used to frame the issue. It's about time we explored what preservation means and what kind of protection is really offered by these different categories. So let's invite the experts in to talk about the dashboard that tracks and monitors our progress on these state goals. Join us next month. We'll talk about another important issue to frame the future of forestry in Maryland. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Megan, for your wonderful moderation. And stay in touch, Kyle, because we're going to revisit this one again in October of 2026. Thank you, friends. Bye-bye.